All right, we're gonna try this again. Let's see if I got the sound working this time. I think it should be. Tested it out in Zoom before I hop back on here. So my apologies for the technical difficulties there. Those of you guys that do hop in here, please let me know. Please let me know if the sound is working. That was legitimately very funny because it was a rare time where I wasn't really looking at the chat early on. Usually I try and monitor it fairly early on as I'm getting going and laying out where it is that we're going with the show today, but I wasn't. So I'm sorry that I went on for like 5 minutes there without seeing somebody tell me that there was no actual sound for it this time around. So again, if you are just hopping in, please give me a heads up in the chat if you are able to hear me. Let's make sure that the sound is working before we get this rolling. And if you are watching this taped after the fact, just follow the chapter markers down at the bottom if you want to skip through some of this. I'll have the chapter markers there for when we actually get up and rolling with the discussion. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. We got sound working here. That is good news. Good news, everybody. Let's try this again. Okay. So today we have what I'm calling like peak Texas Big 12 offseason right now. Any Big 12 offseason, that's actually a pretty good exercise. Maybe I should do that for next time. Put together like a checklist, like a bingo card for what happens during a Big 12 offseason. But inevitably, a part of it is that Texas hype gets out of control, right? And we're definitely there. We're seeing more hype about Texas potentially having one of the best offenses in the country, best offense in the Big 12, best quarterback room in the Big 12, and being a legitimate Big 12 title contender. That is certainly being utilized a lot. And that is going to be some of the jumping off point today because there's a Big 12 title odds list that came out. And you can see it if you click the link in the description of the video. You can actually see those Big 12 title odds that I'm going to talk about later on in the show. One of the things that will jump off the page is where Texas is at. So in addition to that, we also have a pretty crazy Texas rumor. And it is one of those things that's like almost in direct contrast with all this hype that's going on about what Texas is going to be this season. So it, to me, is a perfect and fitting summation for Texas football and what typically happens during a Big 12 offseason, where we all have to hear about this with Texas over and over again. We're just here doing it once again. It's just the 2022 version of it instead of the 2010, 11, 12, 13, et cetera version of it throughout the history of recorded time in the Big 12. That will be a part of the show today. We're going to break down the rest of this Big 12 title odds list and actually talk some legitimate football because of it, which I think is very interesting because I'll be honest. I mean, it was a wild list. Like it was a wild list. I don't think it was very conventional at all. And when I say conventional, like, what the kind of conventional line of thinking would be right now with where the power ranking would go in the Big 12. Like for those that are going to power rank the Big 12 right now, I don't think a lot of people would have it the same way that these odds went, which again, keep in mind, like Vegas doesn't do this as a power ranking. They do it as, they're trying to maximize their return, right? So that can mean it's not always going to be who they think is the best and just line it up like that. But pretty crazy stuff. West Virginia landed a big-time player in the transfer portal, and I think it underscores to me what's a big point for schools in position of West Virginia, K-State. Honestly, frankly, most of the Big 12 outside of Texas and Oklahoma, if you're not a power brand, I think the way West Virginia landed a transfer here is going to be the wave of the future and a way that schools can really maximize what they're doing on the recruiting trail and still turn it into being pretty competitive in the college football world. Plus, how could I forget this? That the NIL battle rolls on, and we have the latest from the NCAA on that, which right now is going to be that they are talking a really big game. The NCAA is talking a huge game about coming and trying to drop the hammer on schools that are doing NIL wrong to the point of inducement level, which is, basically using a booster to go solicit a player to come there. The NCAA still wants to portray that as being wrong, and they are really, through Ohio State's athletic director, projecting this message of like, we're coming for you, and we're not swinging lightly. Now, the other side of that is they say they know they're going to get lawsuits, which they are, and that to me is why all of this seems pretty silly and may actually hasten the demise of the NCAA. But we'll break that down here today as well. I think that's pretty much what I got for you in terms of the outline. There are some other little topics. Gary Bohannon, from Baylor, chose his destination, which was a surprising one, honestly, to me today, if we're talking Big 12 transfer portal. But as always, you guys can dictate where some of this goes today if you fill up the chat, obviously, but you can get your chat to the top supersede everybody else, pick a topic, have a question or comment for me. You can submit it by typing in the Say Something box and clicking the $sign below Say Something to donate with your chat. That is how you do it. So click the $sign below the box where it says Say Something. That is how you not only donate to me here on the channel and support the work that I'm doing and bringing you Big 12 content like this on a bi-weekly basis. Plus, you're also making sure that you get your question or comment to me and up above everything else going on in the chat. Another thing you can do to help me out, it is totally free. Just click the like button right now. Totally free. Doesn't cost you a dime. I swear it will not. No one's hitting up your Venmo. It's just one click. Helps me out with the algorithm. Helps get that video in front of more eyes and helps grow this thing. Helps grow what we're trying to do here for the Big 12 on this channel. So would appreciate all of that help. What's up, Matthew? What's up, B? What's up, Calico? The Distant Sun, Disco Diva, Jerry, Ron, Austin, Matthew, Daniel, Dizzy by Nature. I see all of you guys in the chat so far. Thank you for showing up. And hopefully this will be a fun one for you here. I love that. Getting a question here. Daniel, what do you think of the toe heel rule? I think K-State would have won the 97 Cotton Bowl. Man, the fact that we're getting a 97 Cotton Bowl reference to start the show is making me very happy. Yes, Kevin Lockett was in bounds. All right. I'm sorry, BYU fans. I think Kevin Lockett was in bounds. I don't know why I'm apologizing to you because you guys won the game. So you got the last laugh on me there. All right. We're off and running here with the Texas stories. I'm going to lump all this together. As I was going through and preparing for the show today, I'd initially thought, all right, we're going to spend some time on this Big 12 preseason title odds list and how somebody is going to put Texas into that number 2 spot right now. Seems pretty ridiculous. It seems very in line with what happens every single year, that most of or a large chunk of national media, fans, etc., that will talk themselves into Texas somehow, some way. I mean, it just happens every single year. You talk yourself into Texas potentially winning the league, being one of the best teams in the league, being a playoff contender, however high you want to set that bar. There's enough time in the offseason. There's enough time to talk about it. Look at the stars that are on the paper. Like, everybody seems to get to that point at some point with Texas in every single offseason. And we definitely seem to be there. But we're also in this peak. It's this mix of, like, there's this hype for Texas that seems very unwarranted for a team that went 5-7 last year with a new coach that's never won more than 9 games as a head coach. There's all this hype for them. And yet at the same time, we get this from the Paul Finebaum show, which would seem to, like, fly directly in the face of that rumor, where it's like, Texas fans, media, et cetera, they want to hype up the team, but then they're hedging their bets at the same time and saying, well, if Sarkisian goes through and has the same Texas football season that Texas has been having for years now, for a decade and a half now, which is, anywhere in the 5-7 to 8-4 range, if there's another season like that, the Urban Meyer rumors are going to spark up again, because they pretty much have already. Like, come on, man. We've got Urban Meyer to Texas rumors once again. Remember this from a couple of years ago. I mean, it seems like the last 2 times Texas has hired a head coach, we've had Urban Meyer rumors. I guess Nick Saban was the last time around. That, like, we've had Saban, we've had Urban Meyer. Anybody and everybody seemingly at the very top of their game in college football has been rumored for that Texas job before. Here's what happened. So Keyshawn Johnson went on the Paul Finebaum show last week. And he was asked where Urban Meyer's next stop was going to be as a head coach. Urban Meyer, of course, has been in the news now here in the last week because there are reports that it seems to be a formality that he's going to join the Fox set once again and be a TV analyst after his just disastrous tenure in Jacksonville as the head coach there. A lot of pushback seemingly from Fox on that. It doesn't seem like everybody's real thrilled about that. I don't know that I would be if I were them either. But you knew it was just a matter of time before it would come back around that there would be job rumors for him. To me, there's no doubt, like, between the track record we've seen of him and how desperate everybody is going to be to win in college football, like, he will have another job somewhere. And honestly, Texas seems like the perfect kind of marriage between the two. And I don't really mean perfect as in it's going to work perfectly, but perfect as in they seem pretty made for each other and pretty destined for each other. But here is what Keyshawn Johnson said. He said, it says, I'm reading from an article here. During a discussion with Paul Finebaum, Johnson responded to a question asking where Meyer's next coaching tenure would be, saying, the University of Texas. Steve Sarkisian is not having any sort of run at Texas right now. 2 years from now, a year from now, Texas has tried to go after Urban Meyer twice, I believe, already. So there's your quote from Keyshawn Johnson, sparking that discussion once again. Urban Meyer and Texas. It is not surprising. It is not surprising in the least, because if there is a place that is going to be one like desperate to win, but really with Texas, as desperate as they are to win, it just seems like Texas is more desperate for just like a big name. They just want the glitz and the glamour. They want to feel important. They want to feel like they have the prowess to go get the biggest and best and brightest in the game. And that, like, the vanity of it matters almost more than the substance of it. And so Urban Meyer, perfect. I mean, he fits that to a T. Like, of course. All right. Urban Meyer makes a lot of sense. That's about as big a name as you could possibly get. It would be a massive national story. Now, not just because of what he's done in the college football world, but because of his NFL career and being a TV analyst. Like, he kind of hits all three pillars there of fame that you could possibly have as a coach. That is, like, Texas fancies itself a program that really deserves Urban Meyer. Now, I don't, perhaps there's enough baggage there, I guess, in his past to make you question it. But look at who Texas's head coach is right now. I'm not saying people can't change. I'm not saying Sark hasn't changed, but that's a hell of a demon that Sark has in his past that Texas has already hired. And that was for a far lesser coach in terms of accomplishments. And if we're talking about what accomplishments Sark has put out on the field versus Urban Meyer, it's not even close. And Texas has already gone after him and made him the head coach, while paying a ton of money for him and the buyout of Tom Herman. Like, I don't know. To me, there's no doubt Texas would go try and get Urban Meyer. So I think that's a pretty astute observation there from Keyshawn Johnson, and something that would be a match made in heaven for both of them. Would it actually be successful? I don't know, man. I mean, look, I think Urban clearly is a great college football head coach, but I wonder how much of the aura around him is eroded now based on what a joke his NFL tenure became, and some of the stuff we've heard about how he treated people, and trying, like, bringing in that Iowa strength coach. Like, just so many disastrous moves. He's turned into a joke. Of course, there was the thing with the girl at the bar. It just seems like it's going to be a tougher and tougher putt the further and further Urban Meyer gets away from, like, the Florida national championship days. So yes, it could be successful. Yes, I'm sure Texas would be thrilled with it. But if we're continuing to lay the groundwork for how it could happen, I mean, if we're talking about a year or two from now, like, we're talking about Texas, like, literally going into the SEC. And if it is Sark just mired to mediocrity for the next year or two, you can definitely see how Texas fans and Texas boosters, whatever, would be very antsy about it and be like, hey, man, we need to run this guy. If Urban Meyer's out there, he's available, he's interested, we got to do this, make this big splash move before we go to the SEC. A lot of the timing on it would really seem to add up from that standpoint too. Urban goes and tries to rehab his image, do the TV thing, at least just get as far away from Jacksonville as he can in the course of a year, settles down a little bit, and then all of a sudden Texas is sitting here looking at somebody to make the SEC jump with them, and they go get Urban. So this is just, it's all so very Big 12 Texas offseason. We have a stirring pot of hype for Xavier Worthy and Quinn Ewers and Bijan Robinson, who's riding around in Lambos right now, getting paid for it in Austin. And man, it's going to be the best offense in the country. But, if it does happen to go the same way it's gone for the last decade and a half, then, we've got Urban Meyer lined up already too. It's just, this is the Texas game, man. This is the Texas game. That's pretty much the bingo space, the free space on your bingo card. Like, the one in the middle is just a free space for the Big 12 offseason bingo. Your free space is just people start picking Texas to win the league. That's that free space every offseason. Every offseason we're going to have it. And then wild Texas coaching rumor, that can be an actual, like, not a free space, but just one of the spaces on the bingo card as well. We've already hit a couple of those. Calico Willie, thank you for the donation. Calico Willie says, I watched the Texas spring game highlights. Not impressed. I saw one really nice throw from Quinn Ewers. I saw a couple of highlights. Didn't actually sit down and care to watch the game. I just feel like, what am I going to learn from a Texas spring game that's going to be, I know they have really talented players. I know that I'm going to see guys that look great coming off the bus. I know that I'm going to see a quarterback in Quinn Ewers who can definitely make a ton of throws. He was as hyped as basically any high school quarterback recruit we've seen coming out in the last decade, 10, 15 years, whatever. I'm sure he's going to be able to do things in their spring game. It doesn't change the fact that I've seen enough Texas football over the last 15 years to know what this thing looks like year in, year out, no matter how much talent they have, no matter what kind of quarterback situation they do have. Tim, I don't see a comment attached to your donation, but thank you very much for the donation, Tim. Very much appreciate that. So, Tim, if you do have something and I'm just missing it, man, just let me know. Joe, I see Joe with a donation. Joe, in here once again. Very common to see you in the chat, so I love that. Thank you, Joe. Joe says, I would love to see Texas lose again this year. Yeah, I assume I see someone right under that says, lose to who? The Jayhawks? I would imagine that's probably the comment, right? Like another loss to Kansas. Because Texas has what? Two in the last, what's the other one? Like 2016, 2017, two in the last 5 years, two in the last 6 years to Kansas. No Big 12 championship since all the way back in 2009. They've averaged a 7-5 season since Colt McCoy left campus. Yeah, that's what Texas football is here at this point. If you want to be like those all-stars who have already donated here, you can click the $sign below the chat box where it says say something. Not only donate to the channel and support what it is that I'm doing, but you can get your question or comment into me and dictate where we're going on this chat thing. If you're tired of me talking about Texas, if you want to lean in more to the Texas talk, you can certainly do that. Appreciate all of you guys that do donate there. Now, you have a little bit of like a study guide almost to look at here for this part. If you go to the description of the video, I did include a link to the graphic on Twitter of these Big 12 title odds from Bet Rivers Sportsbook. Now, I don't know much about the credibility of Bet Rivers Sportsbook, but this made the rounds on Twitter. College football Twitter certainly got a hold of this, the Big 12 title odds that were here. It's worth discussing because I would not have thought that anybody that was going to throw together a list of that would come up with this list in this order. But this is what we have, and a part of it is Texas. And I'm sure Mark, who's in here with a lot of Texas love, says keep Texas out of your mouth. Mark, I will not keep Texas out of my mouth. I will continue to preach the reality of what Texas football is. But Mark has listed for us, guys, the 3 words that we all long to hear. Yes, that every human longs to hear. No, not I love you. Those 3 words are Texas is back. Mark says Texas is back, guys. So Texas is freaking back. They are the second most likely team to win the Big 12, according to Bet Rivers Sportsbook. Bijan Robinson has a Lambeau deal, and we have rumors about Urban Meyer being the head coach there once again. Texas is back, folks. Mark, I would love a time machine to know what your reaction was when those words were uttered by Sam Ellinger. Sam Ellinger. I always want to call him the columnist, former columnist for the Kansas City Star. Sam Ellinger. When Sam Ellinger got on the mic at the Sugar Bowl and uttered those. I'm sure you were all in on that at that point. But anyway, sorry, Mark. It looks like you have a good sense of humor about this, Mark. So I do appreciate that. But let's look at these, man. Let's look at these. Okay. Texas comes in at number 2. Look, I have no problem, first of all, Oklahoma being the betting favorite to win the league, of course. And you guys know I'm not super high on Oklahoma, but if you put a gun to my head and ask who's going to win the league, I mean, it's the same deal as Texas, but working in reverse. If you put a gun to my head and said, will Texas win the Big 12 every single? No, of course not. If you put a gun to my head and say, who's going to win the Big 12 in football? Oklahoma. If you do it for me and say, who's going to win the Big 12 in basketball? Kansas. And most of the time, you're going to be right. History is just on your side. Even though I think there will be an erosion of the program with Brent Venables, I do think he's going to be and erosion's probably too strong. I think it'll be a step down. I think big picture, long term, when we look at the Venables era, it will be a step down from what Lincoln Riley did at OU. In spite of that, they are still definitely the favorite to win the league this year. There's not an overwhelming favorite outside of that, and there's plenty of championship residue left over, like all over that program at Oklahoma because they've done so much winning. I'm not as high on Dylan Gabriel, certainly, as I was Caleb Williams, but that's still a solid quarterback. Like, it's a good situation to be walking into. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. So, of course, they deserve to be the favorite to win the league. But Texas at number 2 here, man. I mean, that's just – look, if you're a sports book, I get it. If you're trying – they're going to be a lot – Texas is a team that will attract a lot of attention one way or the other in terms of people throwing money down on them. So I'm sure there is a method to the madness here as to why they wind up there, and this isn't just a straight power ranking. It's a combination, I'm sure, of a lot of it. It's a combination of catching a little bit of whiff of all that hype that's come in for Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy and the kid that transferred from Wyoming that I always forget his name, and Bijan Robinson and all the guys that Texas has loaded up on offense, right? And Sark is an offensive guy. That's the whole selling point to him as a head coach. So I get why there's a lot of hype there. But I think when you take this into account with a sports book, it's like, hey, we know a lot of people will bet on Texas. This is just what people do. We throw Texas up there and listen to all this hype about Quinn Ewers and the offense, and we're just going to go ahead and plop them in at number 2. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. There's just there. I mean, if you're a Texas fan, you have to at least admit there's no value in Texas there. If you're in terms of like trying to get your money's worth here, Texas at plus 225 at number 2 in Big 12 title odds does not give you much value at all in terms of picking them to win the league. The value is very easily here, very easily with, I would say, two teams, Baylor and K-State. And if you know what, even as much as I hate on them, if you want to roll Iowa State into that discussion, we can have that discussion as well. But Baylor is the one that stands out. Defending Big 12 champs sitting here at plus 1,200 at 5th most likely to win the league. What are we doing with that? Where are we coming up with that lack of respect for Dave Aranda and company? Like, I mean, it's not a perfect situation. They have certainly lost some pieces from last year, but Aranda seems like an extremely competent coach. That is a program that has been able to win 3 Big 12 championships in the last decade. They've done it getting to the Big 12 championship anyway with 3 different coaches here. Like, that's a program that's proven to be able to do this, to rebound, take some hits, and just keep on coming. They to me, have earned enough respect for that. And they also, I think, made the right choice at quarterback in going with Blake Shapen, a guy that gives them a higher ceiling, I think, at QB. So, like, that is the definition of, like, value. If you are, now, again, I'm not a gambler, so I guess you could just say, hey, man, you don't really do it. Like, don't take your advice. Well, fine. But I know enough. I'm like Jay-Z. I always quote the Jay-Z line, right? I ain't past the bar, but I know a little bit. And the little bit I know is you're looking for some value. Baylor being that far down and with the odds stacked against them like that, that is where you get value by plopping that down on them to win the league. Now, I saw tweets, and I tried to go look this up. Bet River was like, if you don't live in one of the states where you can legally gamble, I couldn't find the actual updated like live odds on that. But I did see some tweets that it changed almost immediately because people started hammering Baylor. Like, that was an easy one for college football fans to pick out. Not just Big 12 fans, but I think anybody that follows college football could pick that out and be like, bam, that's what you do. You go attack that because there is value there. So it seemingly has changed pretty quickly. But, boy, that is Baylor fans, fire up the angry tweets, the emails, whatever. You put that in the locker room. Definitely put that in the locker room. That is bulletin board material. That is chip on your shoulder stuff right there for Baylor being listed at 5th. And we haven't even discussed. We haven't. The elephant in the room there is who's actually in front of them. Mexican Medic, I see the donation. Let me get to Joey McGuire and Texas Tech in just a second, because I'll discuss them here as we get through the Big 12 odds. So I very much appreciate the donation. I'll give you some specific Texas Tech talk in just a minute here. West Virginia is the team that is at number 4. Now, I am not here, Mountaineer fans, like, this is no personal vendetta against you guys at all. Don't take this personally, but that to me is pretty ridiculous. Neil Brown is a game under 500 in 3 years as West Virginia's head coach. Last year, West Virginia was 6-7. West Virginia lost 20 players, 20 players to the transfer portal this offseason. Akeem Mesidor, it's a stud that they lost in the portal. Josh Chandler, another linebacker. They lost both starting corners. Winston Wright, also gone now. Now, I realize a part of this is Jarrett Dagey left at quarterback. You upgrade with JT Daniels. I would not sit here and tell you that's not an upgrade. So that's a phenomenal find in the transfer portal for Neil Brown. Obviously, a guy who a lot of people at Georgia wanted to see play last year. So there's definite value in that. But I don't. To me, JT Daniels does not wipe out everything else that happened and the previous track record of Neil Brown. I don't think JT Daniels is ready right now to just like snap his fingers and all of a sudden turn West Virginia into a Big 12 title contender, right? I think there have been enough chinks in the armor there to be very skeptical of that. And to place them in front of Baylor, I mean, what have we seen from those two programs over the last 10 years in the Big 12? We've seen one that can fairly consistently be ready to jump up and challenge for a Big 12 championship, and one that definitely cannot. And I'm a guy that's been really high on Neil Brown. I mean, I've been pretty stunned that Neil Brown has not taken more of a jump from this like kind of 500-ish level and program that he's been at West Virginia. But you can't be doing that to him. You can't be sliding them in front of Baylor there with the odds. I think that was definitely a misstep, and it obviously leads to maybe a lot of free money being given away by the book because of the Baylor Bears. If they're going to win the Big 12 championship, I would imagine they're going to be leveraged to lose a lot of money there because of the way that they did this. Let's see. Okay, so Mexican Medic, will Joey McGuire of Texas Tech be what Brown was with Texas? All right, so that's an interesting comp. Are Texas Tech fans making that comp that like Joey McGuire would be the Mac Brown basically of Texas Tech? I can see what you're saying there because he's a guy that I like is extremely likable, that is making an impact across the state, very well liked and respected across the state wherever it is that he goes to try and recruit. Recruiting seems to be, I mean, we know he can do that. He's definitely doing that at a very high level at Texas Tech. So it doesn't need to prove that. And Mac Brown, strength, big time, bringing in talent, being able to talk to anybody, schmooze anybody up, deal with the boosters, finesse. I mean, Mac Brown had a lot of finesse at Texas, being able to finesse the boosters and finesse that whole situation. Again, in a world where Austin was not the distraction quite that it is today. Do I think there's a chance of that? Yeah, I think the upside, obviously, with Joey McGuire is massive. It's massive, but it's a high ceiling, low floor situation to me with McGuire. As a K-State fan, I view it pretty similarly to Jerome Tang. I feel very good about Tang. He's proven to me that he can definitely recruit and can definitely like light up a press conference and say all the right things and get people excited. But, we got to go see him actually prove it on the court/field. And that's going to be the question with McGuire is, can that happen? So is the potential there? Yes. But do I look at this list, for instance, and see, so I see Texas Tech, they're down there with the next to last odds to win the league at plus 2,800. That feels a touch low to me. That feels a touch harsh. To be honest, I would flirt with putting them above TCU, especially if Tyler Shuck is going to be like healthy and really what people think he can be potential wise this year at quarterback. I would certainly listen to that argument in Texas Tech. I can understand why you would be not thrilled with seeing yourself there at next to last in the Big 12 title odds list here. But I think it's all very much up in the air. McGuire was I think it's a great hire based on what you know now and what the options were and realistic options. Like, I love the move. I love going big. I love swinging for the fences if you're Texas Tech with McGuire. But I will need to see what it actually looks like on the field before I get totally all in on it, right? So I appreciate the donation there. Mexican Medic, Calico Willie. Calico Willie says, check out Matthew Turnbull's post. We reconnected on the chat. No fun 2-1. I'll be honest, Calico Willie, it's going to be a little tough for me to try and do that and keep things interesting here on the chat for everybody. So you may have to try and update me on what it is that what you're getting at there, what it is that you want me to hit up. But I certainly really appreciate the donation. I appreciate you being here, but you may have to give me a little bit more context and just spoon feed it to me because I don't really have time to go through the chat to read it there. But do appreciate that. One other thing I will throw in here from this list on the Big 12 title odds is K-State, I think, is another one where there is a pretty good amount of value there, a plus 2,000. And, if you just looked at that and said, like, if you're going to do Big 12 power rankings and put K-State there, I think that's pretty silly. Now, the X factor here is, do I just have the Homer glasses on too much in terms of Adrian Martinez? Because that's going to be the crux of it all. Like, is Adrian Martinez going to be a reformed player at K-State and have cleaned up some of the excess mess that was the turnovers at Nebraska? I think there's a very good chance that happens because I think Scott Frost sucks. I mean, Scott Frost is a terrible coach. I think that's a bad situation to be in, to be his quarterback. And I think he's going to get some better coaching, a fresh start that just seemed desperately needed for Martinez. And he still has, I mean, that dude, speaking of like high risk, high reward, that dude still has some highlight reel plays. I think some of that can be reined in at K-State and pair him with a dynamic running back like Deuce Vaughn. I think those two can make a pretty lethal combination. And K-State has, in terms of front line, like starting 22, it's a pretty good starting 22. There are going to be questions depth-wise, but then K-State just this weekend pulled in 4 transfers. They got 4 commitments/transfers, like 1 JUCO, 3 through the portal, I believe is what it was this weekend. And they were key positions of depth, like where they really needed them. Defensive back and running back, running back, and wide receiver. It was 2 DBs, a wide receiver, and a DB. That's what they need. That's what they need. So that makes me feel a lot better about them heading into the fall. I think there's an outside chance K-State can get there. I think the way K-State fans feel right now is like, hey, this could be like a 9-win team that flirts with getting to Arlington. So having them that low and plus 2,000, I do think there's some value there. Call me a homer or whatever, but I don't think K-State's finishing 8th in the Big 12, which is what this would have it at if you're judging it like a power ranking. So to me, that means that there is some value there. I guess the other thing too, like Iowa State plus 1,400, that doesn't seem ridiculous because we've got to see it from Hunter Deckers. I like him a lot as a quarterback, to be honest. K-State recruited him really hard. I think the size, the arm, there's a lot to like there, but stepping in for Brock Purdy at Iowa State, it's not an easy thing to do, being that Iowa State would consider him, I think, the best quarterback to ever play there in history. So there are a lot of questions, and the talent that's gone. I mean, Breece Hall, for instance, right? 2nd-round draft pick to the New York Jets. A lot of talent that's gone from Iowa State, but Matt Campbell has proven that he's going to win 7 games every year. So that would at least like put you remotely in the conversation. There's probably some value there with that too. But all in all, man, it is just it's just a crazy list. There's a lot that you can nitpick with that. And just seemed like, I mean, it's very good for discussion. It's very good for fodder for all of us. It's very good for, just fans in general. We all want to talk about college football right now. And if we got a boring list, there wouldn't be very much to talk about. But you do have to, I think, kind of roll your eyes at some of what we see from the list that came out there. Julius, thank you for the donation, Julius. Julius says, I'm feeling like Freddy Krueger with the amount of times Texas and USC's hype has burned me. Boy, Julius, yeah, you got to be careful with that, man. You got to be careful with it. And USC was very similar. I feel like for years, for the last, 5 to 10 years, I mean, certainly Texas, but Michigan, Florida, USC, like those feel like schools that have all been in very similar positions that you always have to be very careful with them on that, because they've always seemed to have the same issues where it's like, outside of, Ellinger to an extent at Texas, none of those schools have ever really seemingly had the answer at quarterback. Obviously, Michigan had a fantastic season this past year. They finally broke through, but they had been in the same position as Texas for a long time before that. And, Florida, same there. Like, could have some great athletes, some great teams on paper, and never could figure out the quarterback, never could really figure out the offense. Churning through head coaches, feels like a place with way more potential than what they're actually realizing. And USC, obviously, in the same boat. Now, I think at this point, you're going to see, Julius, a lot of hype for USC as well. Deservedly so. I love the Lincoln Riley move there. I think that's a perfect marriage and a complete home run hire by them. So I think that will get turned around pretty quickly. You would not find a bigger winner in the portal this offseason than Lincoln Riley and what he was able to do. Say what you will about him being sketchy, call him Tebow, whatever it is that you want to do. The guy did win the portal and brought in a lot of talent and may not be done. I mean, we'll see if Jordan Addison goes there. May not be done. Same with Texas. Texas is involved there as well. One of those guys gets the Biletnikoff winner at wide receiver. That may change how legitimate some of the preseason hype is. But for Texas, I'm still staying away. And the difference there simply is Lincoln Riley versus Steve Sarkisian. Both bad situations at USC and Texas. Too many cooks in the kitchen. USC's athletic department's been kind of a mess. Texas, just the whole program, everything has been kind of a mess. But I believe much more in USC. I think you can get behind some of that hype. But you still have to be careful, right? Like, I don't think USC's making the playoff next year. So if you're talking about buying like playoff hype, no, I don't think Lincoln's making the playoff next year. But I think they'll be a top 15 to top 20 team. And then Texas, I don't think they're winning the Big 12. They're probably going to be 7-5. I would pick Texas to go 7-5 again this year at this point. I don't think it's a team that legitimately challenges for the Big 12 title. So, Julius, for your sake, man, I hope you don't get burned. I certainly hope you don't get financially burned by either one of those two teams. And even though I'm sitting here telling you, like, hey, I believe in USC, if you're somebody that's been burned by them before, I would make USC prove it. I would not. What the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I would not get too far down that road once again this year if I were you. So anyway, some fun discussion there. Some fun discussion. And honestly, think about the quarterbacks that are going to be in this league next year. In terms of just name value, like Quinn Ewers, JT Daniels, I mean, those two at the top of the list, like Adrian Martinez, just in high profile guys that people will definitely tune in to watch and be fascinated to see what it is that they do. Let's throw Spencer Sanders into that mix. High risk, high reward guy that could be very fun to watch. Like Blake Shapen. It's another kid that I think has a ton of potential at Baylor. It may not be like this established, like Sam Bradford, Colt McCoy era of Big 12 quarterbacking, but we're going to have some very intriguing quarterbacks and guys that have made plenty of names and headlines throughout their career playing in high-profile spots and for high-profile programs. So having a discussion about where Big 12 quarterback rooms rank right now, I do think is very intriguing. Tyler Shuck. I should not leave Tyler Shuck out of that mix because high-profile Oregon transfer who's at Texas Tech, right? So it seems like almost everywhere you turn in the Big 12 right now, there's an extremely high-profile quarterback transfer that is there getting ready to start this year for their team. Okay, I talked a lot about NIL last time. You know what? Let me move in here before I get to NIL and just say, if you want to donate to the channel, support what I'm doing, and make sure that your question or comment is seen by me in the chat, you can click the $ below where it says say something to donate. Support the Big 12 content that I give you on a weekly basis here on the channel. And again, get your question or comment into the chat ahead of everybody else and steer where it is that we're going with this thing. I talked a lot about NIL last week. I think that was the midweek show last week on Thursday where I talked about that. We have a bit of an update on that. It's basically that the NCAA now is just really talking tough. They are talking tough. A lot of times you'll go to a bar, there will be a really drunk guy that probably wearing like an affliction shirt, trying to project toughness. But you know on the inside, no matter how much that guy talks, no matter how drunk and loud he gets, maybe not 9 times out of 10, but at least like 6 or 7 times out of 10, that's not a dude who's really about it. There's way more bark than there is bite. And that's the NCAA right now. A few too many pops at the bar, going off talking in their affliction shirt about what it is that they're going to do. They're going to bring down the hammer. That's what we're hearing about NIL right now. And this is a quote from Ohio State AD Gene Smith in an article where he's quoted by CBS Sports where they're talking about the NCAA as early as tomorrow laying down new legislation for what's going to happen to boosters and schools that are getting too far down the road with NIL outside the bounds of what they believe is actually legal, right? Here's a quote from Ohio State AD Gene Smith. He says, "We know we're going to get lawsuits." So the NCAA is like, put them up. We don't care. We know you guys are going to sue us. We know that this is coming. We don't care. Yes, we got destroyed in court by the Supreme Court. Yes, we now seem to be on this path and we're never going to win any kind of amateurism sort of case here. Free market, these kids are going to get their money. There's not much we can do about it, except we're going to try and throw the book at you, and we'll just see you in court again. Yes, we're going to take on boosters who have enough money to be giving like millions of dollars to college kids right now and probably have access to great lawyers that will be able to do the same thing that the Supreme Court did to us. But you know what? Damn it, we're going to talk real tough about it right now because everybody in the college football world is freaking out. Administrators, coaches whose lives have been turned upside down and made much more difficult. Those 6- and 7-figure paychecks don't hit quite the same when you're having to do this type of work and dealing with all that's going on with NIL and the transfer portal, et cetera. There is a desperate sense of urgency from all these people to the point where the NCAA is now talking very, very tough about it. Very tough. So it's just going to be a mess. Here is from the article. It says, if boosters are found to have collaborated with a program to use NIL benefits as an incentive to lure prospects to the school, the penalties could be severe. Options include cutting scholarships, instituting recruiting restrictions, and hitting programs and perhaps coaches with lack of institutional control penalties. These are punishments associated with level 1 violations. Here's another quote from Gene Smith, Ohio State athletic director. It says the booster penalty is disassociation primarily, but the schools, if they're culpable, that's where you can go deep. So that's a part of the real tough talk, right? They're saying we will throw the book at you, schools. Sorry, I'm feeling like I'm about to sneeze here. I'm getting very choked up about all this. They're saying, schools, you better be prepared. Boosters, we'll toss you out and disassociate you from the school. But if you schools are found to like be in on this, be helping facilitate this, which virtually everybody in Power 5 football right now has a collective where it's a bunch of boosters working together to form a pot of money that can then be used for NIL. that's kind of the standard operating procedure right now if you want to be competitive. So that is going on like everywhere. I mean, if that is the line and that is what you're going to try to shut down, good luck is what I would say. That's a lot of work for an agency in the NCAA that never gets around to punishing anybody in any sort of timely manner, unless you go the Oklahoma State route and basically, I hate to say it for Oklahoma State fans, are suckers about it like they were with basketball and try to help them out and admit wrongdoing and the things that, should help you out. It works the opposite. Then they get on top of you faster and they actually do penalize you. Whereas if you're KU and you throw up the middle finger, 5 years later, nothing's happened, right? That's how this goes. So the NCAA, this organization that has been woefully lacking in terms of what they bring down on big-time programs and lacking in timeliness with all of this, all of a sudden is going to go out and try and hit like every program in the country, every Power 5 program in the country for doing NIL the way it's being done right now. I mean, just you can tell by the tone of my voice how just ridiculous I think that is. Ridiculous the idea of that seems to be for the NCAA to actually have the teeth to do that and execute it. Now, speaking of tough talk, there was more in the article about how quickly this will happen. The NCAA says, look, like Gene Smith said, we know it's going to happen faster than what we would normally do. This is not going to be like we've got to wait a year to have the hearings and do all this. We'll expedite the process, which probably good news is there. Probably kick the can further down the road in terms of when all that gets settled. The NCAA says they're coming, and they're coming right now with rules that will be put in place tomorrow. And the NCAA has said in the past week that a lot of this will be retroactive. It's not just now moving forward. If you've done it before, you're screwed and we're coming after you. It's going to be an absolute mess. One, warranted skepticism on how quickly and how organized the NCAA can be in terms of getting on top of this if they really do want to do it. Two, if they do actually do it, they are going to get sued. You have all these different state laws that they'll be competing against, plus the Supreme Court ruling to go back to once again. I just don't see any way the NCAA is going to ultimately win a lot of these lawsuits. And then we're just going to have litigation with all these schools with impending penalties. Will they actually serve the penalties? If there is legislation that's, lawsuits that are on top of all of that going on, it's going to be a mess. Like that sounds like a mess. You think it's a mess right now. It sounds like even more of a mess that we're about to walk into in the NIL world with college sports. I get that the administrators and coaches all feel panicked and that they need to do something, but I don't know, man. I think you run the risk here of just getting the NCAA pushed off. It seems like the NCAA right now is kind of like hanging off the lifeboat and about to be shoved out to sea forever to never be seen from again. And this may be them actually hastening that process, because if now all these schools and big, powerful schools in the Big Ten and the SEC are going to have to be wasting their time with lawsuits here, it's going to make the process quicker to look around and be like, what the hell do we need the NCAA for? We've all been talking about breaking off and doing our own thing anyway. Power 5 conferences just doing their own thing and leaving the NCAA to clean up all the rest of the mess, for the other conferences. I think you very much run the risk of this actually getting sped up if you do it this way, and if you really do come after this. So I guess get your popcorn ready is all that I have to say. And I don't think this is going anywhere anytime soon. I think we're going to have a ton of headlines about this. I think it'll continue to dominate the offseason. And it's, in a way, it sucks. In a way, it's very interesting. There are a lot of emotions that I have about it. I'm not this like doomsday prepper. Like, I think this is, batten down the hatches. The sport's over as we know it. Like, it's never going to be great again. I still consider realignment to be a much bigger threat, obviously, to us here in Big 12 country, but also just in general to the health of the game. But this is going to really muddy the waters. This is going to really muddy the waters if and when this happens from the NCAA. I outlawed college football. Sorry, I missed this. Outlawed college football. Tebow, that blank out west for the uninitiated there, a.k.a. Linky Boy, a.k.a. Lincoln Riley, was gifted a winner from Stoops. Tebow will have to build a winner from a 4-win team. I don't think he can. Well, there is some fairness in the point that you bring up there, in that Lincoln Riley was handed the keys not quite to a Ferrari. This is where I need to be better with cars. I don't really know much about cars. I don't know what the analogy would be there. Like, what's something like a step below a Ferrari, and then he turned it into a Ferrari. That's basically what Lincoln did. He kind of revitalized the end of Bob Stoops' career there by bringing in his offense. I think you're not giving Lincoln enough credit. I think some of that's for a little bit of revisionist history. And I think the other thing would be like USC's not far off, honestly, from what Stoops handed Lincoln, just because of the resources they have, because of recruiting in Southern California. Look, as easy as it can be to recruit to Oklahoma's name and accomplishment and all of that, recruiting into Southern California with USC's name, history, and accomplishment is an easier thing to do. I think it's discounting what USC actually is as much of a mess as they have been. And yeah, so I would say this is where we disagree a little bit, Outlawed College Football, which is perfectly fine. But I would say you undervalue the job Lincoln did, and you undervalue slightly what USC is right now. So that's where we would be off just a little bit. But I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate that that opinion of yours, and I certainly appreciate you being here on the channel. And it'll be something like, look, I know, I mean, the second Oklahoma has a big win next year, I know I'm going to hear it from Oklahoma fans, and I know that we're going to be going back and forth. If Lincoln Riley loses a stupid game early, we're going to hear it all. That's the beauty of college football. That's the beauty of sport, right? That we get to do that and we get to have fun with that and like follow these predictions that we all make. Rob S. Rob, I appreciate the donation. What up, Rob? Rob says, if you were Big 12 commissioner and Amazon, Netflix, Apple offered the Big 12 $40 million per school to just be on streaming, do you take it? If no, what about 50? I mean, 50 right now is like that's like what the Big Ten's making right now is 50. Now the Big Ten supposedly is about to double that by signing $1 billion deal. But if you get 50, I mean, my God, like I would take it and run as fast and far as I can right now. You say take it and run, it'd be like take it and run a marathon, dude. If they're going to give you 50 million per school, yes, absolutely. 40, yes, absolutely. I mean, 30 has been kind of that number, which is basically where the Big 12's at now. I think it's been about 32, right? 30 has been the number where you're like, if we can get to 30, that would just be wonderful. So yeah, to me, like anything over 30, you absolutely, absolutely, absolutely do. It is hard to know. You know, I mean, it seems like the optimism has grown on that number where it was sitting more like anywhere from like 9 to 20 at its lowest depths back in July before the 4 teams were added. I think optimism has like trended that back up toward like, hey, maybe you could get actually pretty close to the 30, 32 that they're at right now. It's hard to know if that's just us being way too close to it here and having our hopes way too high, and if it's going to be completely devoid of all of that. I think last year helped. I think the Big 12 did a lot to try and help itself last year. I think the 4 teams they've added definitely help, but we did hear that BYU was the only one that would really add tangible value to the TV contract when all that was happening. So I don't know. Some of this too, you know, the other wild card here and all this, Rob, and I'll continue to say it, but when we ask these big picture questions about the Big 12, I need to know who the commissioner is going to be. I need to know who the guy is going to be at the negotiating table with Amazon, Netflix, Apple. Is it somebody that has done a lot of this before? Is it somebody that can be very dynamic? Is it somebody that has TV connections, that knows how to work the room and knows how to, maybe not even TV connections because these are not traditional TV partners, but somebody that will be savvy, hip to the game in terms of what it is that they want, how to market the Big 12 in that way. So there are just so many variables. It's very hard to project. But to answer your initial question, yes, absolutely. $40 or $50 million per school, I would be dancing in the streets if that's what the Big 12 winds up getting from its next TV contract. Robert, from Rob to Robert. I appreciate this. Robert, thank you for the donation. He says, does a rising tide lift all boats if the Big 10 gets $1 billion, or is the new look Big 12 still stuck at 20 million-ish that was projected? Great question. Again, tough for me to know really the landscape of that, because if we're going to say rising tide lifts all boats, the idea would be that like the sport is just gaining popularity in general. Like someone's going to shell out $1 billion to the Big 10, which means that interest in college football is up that much. But we know college football is an extremely regionalized sport. And the Big 10, well, they have all these programs that, you know, are Nebraska, Rutgers, Illinois, right, just dragging down the league. They're still in densely populated areas with a lot of tradition and in parts of the country where a lot of people want to watch them. The Big 12 does not have the same kind of advantages working for it. So I don't really think a rising tide lifts all boats there, unless something, the one way I'll say that could happen is if the Big 10 gets involved, which it sounds like they may, with some of these streaming services, and the streaming services get like a little taste of it, which I would guess they'd be getting like second or third tier kind of Big Ten games. If they get a little taste of it and say, hey, we like this, we think there's something there, now our interest is peaked, we've kind of dipped our toe in this college football water, we'd like some more inventory here, then maybe that brings along the Big 12 some more and increases what you're able to get there for the league. Like I can see that happening, but I don't think as a general concept, like, hey, TV providers are willing to pay that much more money for the Big Ten and the SEC, the two that are already running away from everybody. I don't think that necessarily kicks back to the rest of college football. I think it will just continue to prop up the Big Ten and the SEC, unfortunately, there. Good questions, though, tonight, guys. Good questions, man. I'm very much enjoying the chat here. Let me get to this one last thing because I did tease it. So if you want to get in a donation, click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Not only donate, but get your question or comment into the chat there. You've got probably like 3-4 more minutes before I bounce off tonight. But I wanted to hit on this. So West Virginia, I said earlier, they 20 guys in the portal. It's been a very active, hectic, crazy, busy. West Virginia's lost a lot of talent. They also landed JT Daniels, an extremely high-profile transfer. Well, they also just recently added Miami transfer running back Tariq Austin Cave. And to me, it underscores one of the fascinating new wrinkles in the transfer portal part of the new era of college football, which is there is a ton of value in finishing number 2 for a player's services coming out of high school. It used to be that if you're the bridesmaid there, it doesn't really do you any good. 10 years ago, a kid might transfer, but it's a long shot. Now, what like 50 to 75% of kids in college football right now seem like they will transfer at some point in their career. So if you finish number 2, which West Virginia apparently did to Miami when this kid went to Miami out of high school, if you finish number 2, where is that kid going to be thinking when he gets to his new destination and is not playing as much as he wants to in a year or two and is like, man, I think I need to go do something else? Well, some of those first calls, some of the first interest will probably be toward like, all right, who recruited me first? Who else did I like? Who else was close? And now not only does it pay because so many kids transfer and you could be there, but it pays because it's a one-time transfer penalty-free that we talk about here. And I think that gets lost in the discussion sometimes. People just assume like, kids can just go willy-nilly whenever they want. Well, no, there's one penalty-free transfer. So now the kid's already used up the one penalty-free transfer and has come back to your school. So now if he wants to leave, it's going to cost him a year again. So there's that incentive to stay with you. And if you finish number 2 and the kid goes for a year somewhere, realizes it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, you can benefit a lot by being in the school where you're the landing spot where now, I don't want to say that they're stuck, but they're locked in with much more pressure, still the wrong word, like much more reason to stick at that school because they don't want to take the 1 year to sit out. Kids want the instant results, instant gratification. All of a sudden now, if you have to sit out a year to go somewhere else and become a third school, just more reason for them to be locked in and stay with you. And I think where that can really help is the schools of the caliber of West Virginia, like schools that are not the top tier brands that are going to always be able to get kids. Texas, that's not going to matter that much. K-State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State can absolutely matter. Absolutely matter. If you just get a steady, like bounce back pipeline of kids coming where you finish number 2 to them. And I think a lot of it is schools that are much more based on substance than style, right? Like West Virginia and Miami. The West Virginia program, I would argue, is more substantive than Miami and has been over the last 10 years. If we're just going to use like recent college football. Well, Miami has more style. There's more sex appeal there to going to Miami. There's the appeal of simply being in the city of Miami, right? If you go there and realize, hey, actually this glitz and glamour thing wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. I learned a lesson here. I need to go somewhere that's more about style. Well, if your number 2 is a place more about style, or more about substance than style, you're like, ditch the style, give me the substance. I'm going to come back to number 2, which is a place that I actually know is going to like be much more about football, making me a better player, making me a better man, instead of like, hey, I can go hang out on the dock, at the beach in Miami and run around in a speedboat kind of thing, right? I think schools in the Big 12 can stand to really benefit from that. And that will be an important part of how you operate as a school. Like recruiting is always like 24/7. Ron Prince, K-State legend, right? Ron Prince once upon a time had a great quote where he said, recruiting is like Waffle House. It's always open. I mean, it is truly always open, even more now with the portal that you have to work and On top of that, you finish number 2 for a kid. You can't tamper, right? You can't, be tampering with a kid, but you have to work whatever channels it's going to be. If it's staying in contact with the parents, whatever it's going to be, maintaining some level of relationship there and making sure that you can still tap into that when you need to, if and when the kid is going to transfer. So that is a very, very important thing. And man, the last 5 minutes got crazy here. Thank you. First of all, Bud, thank you, Bud. Bud popping in once again. Lubbock Guest House, Bud. If you guys need a place to stay in Lubbock, you definitely need to talk to Bud. Bud, I'm glad you did this because it reminds me, I am flying to Lubbock on Friday. I will be doing the Big 12 Outdoor Track and Field Championship broadcast on Big 12 Now on ESPN Plus, which is going to be Saturday and Sunday. I think we're on the air Saturday at 4:30. Sunday about the same time. One of them's like 4:30, one of them's 5:30. So if you want to catch me on ESPN Plus, you can, with the great Johanna Gretzel doing Big 12 track and field coverage. But yeah, I'll be in Lubbock. And I have a day on Monday. I was not able to get a flight back out of Lubbock until like 6:30 on Monday night. So I'm going to have like pretty much the entire day Monday in Lubbock to just hang out. And now I've been to Lubbock 5 or 6 times back in my day traveling with K-State. But if you have suggestions for me on what I need to do in Lubbock, I'll ask more about it, hopefully on the midweek show if I remember, and certainly on Twitter I will as well. But those of you that are Tech fans or in Lubbock, like let me know what I need to do while I'm there. So anyway, thank you as always, Bud, for your extremely generous support. And if you guys do need a place to stay in Lubbock, you hit up Bud with the Lubbock Guest House. And Don with an extremely generous donation. Don, thank you so much, man. Don says, sorry I'm late. Before you go, can you talk about K-State recruiting in football and basketball? What are your thoughts on the football and basketball ads this weekend? Also, who's next? Absolutely, I can, Don. I tell you what, you come in with that. You come in with that here at the end. Yes, absolutely, I will talk about that. And Don, I will also promote to you the 3Ma podcast that I do with Derek Young and Cole Manbeck. We should be recording one of those tomorrow during the day some point. So you'll see either Monday or Tuesday. Like, we're going to try and wait for the Antoine Davis decision, big basketball transfer, one of the all-time leading scorers in college basketball. We will wait for that and record something tomorrow or Tuesday. But you'll get a very in-depth discussion on that. If you do follow that podcast, you can find it Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever it is, 3Ma, KCSN, K-State Athletics. Either one of those search terms should get it for you. But it was a big recruiting weekend in football for K-State. They got 4 2022 kids in that are all either transfers from different schools through the portal or one junior college transfer. They got a junior college running back, right? That's a position of need. And it's a kid that TCU offered this weekend. And there was another Power 5 school that got involved and offered. Well, he was on his visit at K-State, but he chose K-State. The word that I was hearing on that is that K-State kind of got in on him before he really blew up because people were more focused on the portal and then realized the portal didn't have as great options and now needed to go back to JUCO. And this K-State was on him early, got that benefit there. So I'm excited about that. They also got a Prairie View A&M defensive back transfer who was first team all-league twice. That should really strike your interest because K-State had a lot of success with Reggie Stubblefield last year, who was a Prairie View A&M transfer and a defensive back. So I'm sure there was a seal of approval there from Reggie on this kid. And we saw how well that worked coming from Prairie View, an all-conference kid at Prairie View. And this kid actually has more accolades than Reggie did. And it's a position of need. K-State desperately needed depth in the secondary. Good frontline pieces with Brents and Boydo, right? But they needed depth. They got depth with this. They also got a junior college defensive back who chose K-State over Florida State. At a Florida State offer, and to be honest, when I saw that, I thought, hey, we've seen this movie before. K-State can evaluate pretty well. They get in on a kid. But then the big boy comes in and offers. Florida State wasn't able to do it. So K-State won that recruiting battle. Kansas was also definitely involved there as well with an offer, but chose K-State. Position of need and a guy that K-State fought off legitimate competition for. And then finally, they got an Ole Miss wide receiver to transfer. Wide receiver has been like a constant sticking point in the offense for a long time. You've always wanted more at receiver. I do think Malik Knowles has turned into a very solid receiver with definite potential there, but you would feel better if you had more dynamic bodies. This is a kid that was at Ole Miss, pretty highly recruited kid out of high school. Hasn't produced much in his 3 years at Ole Miss, but you hope that you can tap into some of that potential and you take the depth piece. You take a a guy with a higher upside depth piece at receiver all day, every day if you're K-State right now, because they have a lot of guys, I think, with lower ceilings at receiver right now, but not the higher ceiling kind of guys, right? And I'm talking like Cade Warner, Phillip Brooks. There's a lot of that in the receiver core. What you want is a guy that maybe has a better athletic profile, that could explode there. Also, I mean, they seem to be really high on RJ Garcia, another young receiver there too. So that's kind of what's happening in football recruiting. A lot of people would want to know about Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards. Like Dylan Edwards did visit KU, but I don't think that's anything serious. I think it's K-State and Oklahoma for Dylan Edwards, and most would assume Oklahoma in that position, but it's how much does Oklahoma really want him? How much would Oklahoma really play him if he went there? He would definitely be a focal point of K-State's offense, with Deuce Vaughn likely leaving after this year if he were to come to K-State. But that seems still pretty 50-50. Avery Johnson, it has seemed like is a K-State lean for a long time, but like Oregon's entered the picture. Notre Dame has been sniffing around a little bit. So, you're going to have to hold on to your hat on that one, unfortunately. It seems like K-State is very close to like getting that domino is kind of wobbling. And if one of them falls, maybe the other one does. And then maybe Joe Otting, too, who's another big in-state kid in Kansas. He just got a Notre Dame offer. They're really close to knocking down the dominoes and pulling in an amazing in-state class. But this is where I would push you back to what I was saying a second ago. If you can finish number 2, there's still a good chance that a couple of those guys decide to transfer in a year or two, and you could still have them back. But that's a pretty comprehensive, I think, update on football recruiting. Basketball recruiting, K-State had Leighton Blocker in this weekend, who's a top 50 national recruit, 5-star according to some services. Kansas offer. Kansas is very in on him. That's a heavy hitter and a guy that Jerome Tang was recruiting when he was at Baylor. So there's the connection. There's the reason that he came in. But he posted some pictures on Twitter of his visit. By all accounts, seemed like he had a really good time on the visit. I believe I saw him out at the baseball game. The K-State KU baseball series that was going on this weekend. So they're doing their best. They're doing their best there. And then Antoine Davis is the decision that everybody will be waiting on Monday. It sounds like K-State and BYU, with maybe like Detroit Mercy, where he was like going back there, somewhat still involved, but it feels like K-State and BYU. I've just heard a lot of things on both sides. There are people that are confident on both sides of that. So it's hard to know exactly what's going to go on there, but K-State really needs scoring and really needs like guard/wing kind of players. So it's one to definitely pay attention to tomorrow. So Don, I hope that's comprehensive enough for you there on the K-State rundown on what's going on recruiting wise. But again, you'll get some more on the 3 Mob podcast coming up. Thank you, Don. Thank you so much for the donation and supporting what it is that I do here. You're the man. And Joe, say something. Nothing, John. Great show. Joe, thank you very much, man. Much appreciate that. You're always welcome, Joe. If you got a hot take you want to get off, if you're going to donate like that, you certainly can lump in a hot take there as well. But I very much appreciate the kind words and the support from you there. So I like it. Is that like that's a Texas Tech like guns up there? Texas Tech fan, Joe. Give me some Lubbock recommendations, Joe, in the next week if you got them. Much appreciate that. And then Outlaw of College Football. Outlaw of College Football in here once again tonight. Appreciate that. Outlaw of College Football says BYU was an underrated acquisition for the Big 12. BYU is the only non-Power 5 to win the national championship in 1984. This access could help BYU become a major player. Yes, totally agreed. And the other part about it, too, that we're seeing, Outlaw, is that BYU has not been afraid to step up in the NIL game. Now, Kalani Sitake, I did see BYU's head coach, had a quote that was kind of making the rounds here recently where he said, I'm not sure that an 18 or 19-year-old's bank account is supposed to have that much money in it. It's like, do we do that for 18 to 19-year-olds who are in other industries and allowing a free market to give them money? To me, that comment comes off a little bit tone deaf, but he's far from the only coach that has had a comment like that. And BYU as a whole seems to be really stepping up NIL-wise, which, back to this Antoine Davis recruitment battle with K-State on basketball, I think that's a big part of the appeal for BYU. So, yeah, you combine BYU being able to utilize a national fan base and their resources that way in an NIL world with the advantages that they already have and now being in a conference, yes, there's absolutely a big jumping off point potentially there for BYU. So, all of you guys that got in at the end, man, Bud, Don, Outlaw, Joe, you guys are amazing. feeling the love. I'm feeling the love. Happy Mother's Day to all of you out there. I don't know how many mothers we actually have in the chat, but I hope all of you guys, you got like another 3 hours here Central Time to text or call your mom if you have not done so already. I have a wonderful mother myself. Got to take her out to dinner earlier this week. So hope everyone had a great Mother's Day. Hope everybody enjoyed the chat tonight. Hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz if you have questions or comments. Should be back at you midweek. It's going to be a little bit tighter this week because I am getting ready for Big 12 track. And then Sunday won't be having a show because I will be doing the Big 12 track broadcast. But I'll keep you guys updated. I'll keep some content coming, and I will talk to you guys soon.